Welcome, everybody, to the Base Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Bromley. Thank you for joining me today. Joining us right now is Cody Lefever, the author of the GZCL program. He had reached out to me a couple of days ago after I did a short review on one of my more recent episodes. One of the viewers had asked me to review it, and I had heard of it, but I'd never actually gone through it. So I ended up going through one of the earlier articles, looking through the structure, looking through the progression, seeing some of the other things you applied. And I was pleasantly surprised with kind of how intuitive it was and how everything fit together. And I could see why it's popular. And unlike so many of the programs we hear about, usually it's things that are like somebody selling it on their Instagram, or it's like an ebook, or it's some like pop training culture thing that's been out there for a while. It's like yours seems like it's a little bit underground. Like it's mainly through your blog. I think it pops up on like Reddit or like Lift Vault, I think, has templates. So I'm really eager to get into where that came about. But first I want to know a little bit about your background. Just tell everybody what you've been up to, how you got started, kind of what your inspirations were, and then where this program kind of fit into all that.
All right. Well, thanks for the great intro. We'll just rewind back, I guess, to like the early 2000s or something like that. I wasn't into lifting weights or fitness in high school. I just skateboarded and did a lot of skateboarding with friends. And I guess that kind of was fitness in a way, because we'd be out skateboarding all day long, right? And a lot of risk involved too. And I think that was maybe one of the psychological factors of getting into lifting weights. About 2004, I determined I was going to join the Marine Corps. And I wasn't strong enough, honestly. I could do like 1 or 2 pull-ups, maybe. I was a scrawny skater kid, like 120 pounds or something like that. I'm only 5.5 feet tall. So if you can imagine.
I was going to ask you.
5.5 feet tall, 120 pounds.
I was going to ask you about the title of your blog. It's Swole at Every Height, right? And I was gonna ask if I was to take that you were vertically challenged, but okay.
Oh yeah, buddy. Oh yeah, I'm team manlet status.
That's fine. I mean, as far as insecurities and lifting go, we're all compensating. So I've always said, if you're short, fat, or socially awkward, this is the hub for you. And I'm marked 2 out of 3.
Really?
You did. So okay, so you started training really just to get in shape for the Marine Corps, just to kind of meet the basic minimum standards.
You got it. Yeah. And joined the Marine Corps. I was an infantryman in my first contract, and my first duty station was the security forces. And that was just like physical training, haze fest, like 5-mile gas mask ruck runs. And it could get pretty brutal, because all the young new guys they'd never been to the fleet like me. I was just like a PFC or a Lance Corporal. And then our NCOs were like combat vets that had been to like Ramadi and Fallujah. And they were like, you guys suck. So we're going to just slay your bodies all day. And so I got pretty good at regular physical training with the Marine Corps, calisthenics, running, and that kind of stuff. Again, stayed small. I was like 135, 140 pounds. I could do like a 3-mile run. I think my fastest time was like 18:36. And, if that gives you an insight of like where my fitness began and then how it's progressed to a totally different realm. So after that, changed duty stations after like 2.5 years or something, got to the fleet, went to Victor unit, which is Fox 29 out in North Carolina, went to Ramadi, started lifting weights in Iraq. There wasn't much else to do. And all the guys I was hanging out with were hitting the gym, because I was like, I'm going to do that too, I guess. And really just try to keep up with a lot of the bigger, more experienced guys in the gym. Had like no clue what I was doing. And did that for maybe 2 years or something like that. Then I discovered what Reddit was. I was in Afghanistan by this time. Started posting some of my lifts on YouTube and Reddit. I think the first YouTube video I ever posted was doing like a squat to a bench, 135 pounds. I was going to go for 100 reps in a set. I got to 99. I just like miscounted. And I'm like wearing boots and utes. So I'm wearing like, my camouflage pants and boots, whatever, just cranking out these reps. And started posting on Reddit. People are like, you're pretty strong for how big you are. You should get into powerlifting. And I didn't even really know what that was. And started getting into powerlifting, and that's kind of what's propelled me into talking about strength training and getting people strong and, competing a number of times myself, getting people into competitions. And yeah.
I want to ask
how it all started and where it's going.
I want to ask about that early training, because what came to my head is the degree to which all of that conditioning and those horrible rucks and the really long distance suck fests you guys had to do, like how that set you up or showed to be like a benefit in training later on for strength training. And then you brought up that 100 rep attempt, which that's one of those is on my bucket list as well. There's a 225 for 100 that I know a couple people have done. And one of them is this guy, Will Dinwiddie. He was a former Army Ranger, and he just talked about like the psychology leading into it. So I'm interested, one, if those were normal workouts for you, just like, how do I punish myself today with a barbell? And then two, how do you feel like the endurance or the psychology aspect of being in kind of set you up? Do you feel like it gives you an edge that other people don't have? Are you able to use it or lean on it to help you out a little bit in your training?
I definitely think so. I think there's an element of like, I like taking some physical risk, like I'm just kind of a thrill seeker in a sense. And through those experiences, you kind of learn what you can like do with your body, right? You can, and it's maybe from me like skating since I was like 13, 14 years old, just jumping on a skateboard. And then, that translates into the Marine Corps, just being like, okay, well, at least I'm not like falling on my ass right now and breaking my ankle or something. Done that before, so it could get a whole lot worse, a whole lot more painful.
Yeah.
And doing these long, just arduous workouts, I kind of like them, really. It's weird. In a recent blog post, I talked about the spectrum from like pleasure to pain, and talking about discipline and passion and that sorts of stuff. And, that turned out to be a much more successful blog post than I had really imagined it to be. And, I'm definitely one of those people where I can take a lot of pleasure from the pain. It's like a horseshoe spectrum, right? They're actually not opposite ends. They're actually really close together.
That's right. Yeah.
So when I started doing more barbell training, I was definitely into the higher rep stuff, like these 99 squats with 135. I just was, I don't know, I'm not saying I invented birthday squats, but on Reddit, I was one of the earlier people to, on my birthday, just get my body weight and crank it out for my age. And now I'm getting older and I'm like, this is not good.
Yeah, that gets
getting
less
older
fun.
And heavier.
It gets less fun.
Getting older and heavier. Yeah. And, those kinds of workouts with just tons of reps and stuff, I think just to get back to your question, it's a mental game. I think it's one of those things that it's a different kind of preparation. If you're going for a 1 rep max lift versus a 20 rep max squat, to me, it takes less mental preparation to go for that 1 rep max lift. The 20 rep max squat, it's like, this is going to be really bad.
That's funny, because that's a point that's a hill I've tried dying on, or I think I have died on in the past, is I've always kind of felt, even when it was harder, when you start out, you're not used to being crushed, that sense of strain, that's definitely something you have to get used to. But I've always felt that the hardest single, double, triple doesn't hold a candle to the stuff that has an endurance component to it, because there's just so much going on. There's more physical pain from the burn you get to the monotony. I mean, just having a barbell on your back for 99 reps, it had to have taken like 8 minutes, 10 minutes to get through. And just the psychological approach, it takes a different gear to be able to do that. But that's always something I've admired from people that have done that type of training, whether it's crazy shit like that, or even just run-of-the-mill bodybuilding that's very long and painful and developmentally extremely valuable. And it's like, if people wonder why some people can train, stupidly, but they have a lot of grit, they end up getting a lot farther than people that are, let's say, very sport specific, but maybe don't like to be uncomfortable that much. So that's a really interesting point. So let's talk about the program. So, like, at what point did the program come about? And I'm actually curious to know what some of your inspiration for it was, because I see a lot of convergence in there, things that I've seen in the past, things that I've implemented. You know, it's always nice to see the things that you've done that worked, like, kind of verified by other people out there.
Yeah.
So what were kind of your early influences for putting this thing together?
So when I got into like lifting weights, I wasn't really following a program at all. I was just trying to keep up with the strong guys in the gym. And they kind of had, and it's funny, you know, I look back and I compare what I was doing then versus what I see people doing now. And nowadays it's like, oh, you got to do starting strength or whatever. You got to do 5x5 or some very simple linear progression program. And those things have merit. But the strongest guys in the gym and how I was able to get as strong as I did, as quickly as I did, was just keeping up with those guys. And they were just workhorses. You know, I don't know if they had a program, but they would do a heavy lift, then they would go for, you know, more reps, and then they would isolate, right? And this was kind of a structure that I picked up on. And then it was like around 2009, I think I started getting into reading more like literature on lifting weights, and not just like scientific literature, but, you know, at first it was T-Nation, you know, just reading these old school T-Nation articles. I remember when 531 was first published on there by Wendler, and seeing like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. This isn't all too different than, you know, like in the generalized structure than what these strong guys are doing that I'm lifting around, you know. There was, of course, percentage progression and stuff that I wasn't doing before that. But I would say 531 was kind of one of the earlier things, and then reading some of Verpito's stuff, like practical programming.
I was going to say,
book, right?
Yeah, I saw some practical programming in there when I was going through. I saw you mention like the 2-step forward, 1-step back approach on one of your splits, and I remember that from there.
Yeah, and then getting into more of the truly scientific literature, like I think it's Tudor Bompa, right? Mm-hmm. Is that the name? Oh, it's been like over a decade since I dove into this stuff. And then some of these like Russian guys, like I'll butcher this name, like Verhokhansky or something.
Yeah,
and then Fred Hatfield published Power, a book of his, and that was really influential to me. I read that I think in 2013 or 2014.
So, and like my experience mirrors that very, very closely. I think I got started a little bit before you, but when you were skateboarding, like that age, that's when I was lifting, and
nice.
All of the, you would think so. all of the years though, I mean, it was a lot of just head down into the wall over and over and over, you know? So it was years before reading was a thing. And even before like social media and YouTube and everything made those resources really available. But it's funny you say that. Like Hatfield, I cite as a resource. Not that I ever read his books, but there were a lot of articles that he had early on, and that was like the first introduction to periodization I ever got. But then looking at, because I always see the difference between these like kind of Americanized, everything's like packaged a little bit better for mass consumption when the Americans get their hands on it. So it's like the progressions are a little cuter and easier to remember. And then you get into the stuff you were talking about with, okay, Verkhoshansky, for example. Once you get into that literature, I mean, God, I remember trying to read through Super Training because there's people that insist that that's like, you have to read it. And then you read it and I'm like, I'm not a dumb guy, but I'm like, what the hell do I do with this? It's so like out there. Do you feel like, or to what degree do you feel like those sources kind of rounded you out compared to what you just learned in the trenches from guys that were stronger than you?
Oh boy, that's a great question. So I feel exactly the same way, like reading Super Training. So I felt dumb, like really dumb. And then I started thinking like, okay, I'm just going to practice, like try to put this together in the gym and experiment a little bit. And things started to click. A lot of that stuff really started clicking after reading Hatfield's book, Power. And it was around 2013, I think. I picked up a number of certifications from the ISSA, and Fred Hatfield was actually, I think, one of the founding members of that. So his strength and conditioning literature and that kind of stuff he would have written many articles that we had to read. And write papers or programs on. So that really helped out. And then what I was doing in the gym had begun to like solidify, right? The stuff I was already doing in the gym started to make a little bit more sense why these things worked and why these things didn't work. And, why this kind of structure and progression was better than this kind at a certain point in time, right? Like, why was here's a good example. Spending too much time working on like heavy singles and that kinds of stuff early on, and then my work capacity declines, even though my sport specificity was getting up higher and higher and higher. After a number of weeks, my capabilities to recover from those heavy singles would just drop off dramatically. And then over time, I began to realize that, okay, well, it's my work capacity is declining because my total training volume has declined because I'm training with such high intensity. So I didn't understand early on what I was doing, but it was very influential. And then later, once I started understanding, that influence like almost became stronger later on.
Yeah. All of that time spent putting yourself through the meat grinder when you're completely blind. It's useful to look back on once you start trying to apply those principles. It's like, oh, that's why when I thought maxing out every day was the key to gains, like, oh, that's why that wasn't working. Like, and it's important. And I always look for that when I'm trying to evaluate somebody. I know they always say that like high performance isn't really a sign of great coaching, but at the same time, when somebody has had their hands in the mud, like that gives a little something when they're trying to help other people where it's not quite clicking. So I think that's a very important aspect. Let's talk. Sorry, go ahead.
Experience matters. I'm saying experience matters. It just increases the chances of being a successful lifter, or a successful coach, or whatever.
Yeah.
You wouldn't hire an out of shape, overweight personal trainer. Nobody does that. So let's not pretend like experience doesn't matter.
Well, you'd be surprised. I worked at corporate gyms for a while, and if you get a 300-pound former car salesman, that's how they sell those training packages. But you're right. When people are looking for who's going to guide them, you want to go with the biggest guy. And it's an interesting dynamic too, because there's guys at Worlds that I wouldn't trust to coach Pee Wee football. So that's always a hard thing to navigate. But it's one box out of many. If you've got the personal experience and then you've got the experience with other people, those are just more dots you can connect, and everything starts to coalesce into like a bigger perspective. I wanted to ask you about the variations, because you sent me a list and it touched on some of these different. I saw there was a really high frequency program. There was a couple that looked like they changed the percent progression. Were those really just born out of a desire to experiment yourself because you like trying new things? Were there specific problems you were trying to solve? And beyond that, how do you recommend that people kind of select or work through those programs?
Okay, so a lot of it was born out of experimentation. So I would try to apply what I had learned in a book or something like that, some idea I had heard or read about from some guy in the gym or on a training forum online or whatever, and then just experiment with it myself. So when I first got into powerlifting, is the program that you reviewed actually is where like week 4 or something, it's like 3, 2, 1, and it's AMRAP after like singles, right?
Yeah, that was a 4-week straight wave where you're doing more 3-week waves now. Is that right?
Currently, yeah. I'm finding like 3-week waves to be just modestly more aggressive, and so you can kind of progress faster. It's about finding that balance, right? 4 weeks are still pretty good for like many people, especially if they have really busy schedules, right? But anyways, so that was the first kind of program that got me into powerlifting. Did really well in that program. I ended up getting like second place overall at the Camp Pendleton Open. First place in like a 148 weight class, qualified for IPL Worlds, used the same program to go to IPL Worlds, won my weight class there, set some records in the 148s. This was like 2012. And then after that, started like moving on and experimenting with different training programs. And it was after IPL Worlds when people were like, wait a minute, like you just put on like, I think it was 90 or 100 pounds, my total from January to November, and staying in the same weight class. And so then that's when people on Reddit, I'd already been posting there in the weight room and our fitness or whatever. They asked me, you know, like, well, can you like describe your training? And I remember there was some time, I think before IPL Worlds, I had to do a conference and like a training in Virginia. So I flew back from 29 Palms. Yeah, that's where I was at the time. And met up a dude from Reddit to just go lift with him. And he was asking me questions about my training. And I kind of used just like a pyramid analogy. And I probably fumbled through the answer and made little sense. But he was like, wow, that's, you know, I like that. You should write a book or something about it, and or a training manual. And, you know, it'll help a lot of people on Reddit. So that's kind of like how that all started with the program that you reviewed. And then since that period, I started reading more about like, you know, like daily undulating progression and, you know, higher frequency training. This is where UHF comes into play. And then there's another program like the Rippler. That one was a program that I actually wrote for a client of mine who seemed like a terminal early intermediate, you know, like couldn't break out of that like beginner gains, but was having a tough time with percentage-based training, you know, like linear progression, 5x5, whatever. And then just was really having a hard time getting to the next level. So wrote the Rippler for him. It was successful for him. Tried it on a few other clients I had at the time. Successful for them. That got published on my blog. It's been pretty successful. And then I guess it was a year before that. I'll rewind. I'm jumping around a lot here. No I was in Afghanistan like 2014, and just I had changed from being a grunt to being community services because I was such a gym rat that I wanted to make sure that I could be as close as possible to the gym at all times. And so this particular MOS field is responsible for ordering and dispersing gym gear in country. So we would get like shipping containers full of gym gear, and that, talk about like a hard workout, is unloading like 100,000 pounds of dumbbells and plates and barbells and benches and racks, and getting that repackaged and shipped to some like combat outpost in some hellhole in the middle of Afghanistan. But, you know, that was a blessing because I was able to be around the gym all the time like I had hoped. And that's when I started experimenting with like a more traditional westernized periodization, where I'm just like working down a ladder of volume, right, from like 12s to 10s to 8s, whatever. And I did this for like across 15 weeks, ended up with like all-time PRs on squat, bench, deadlift. Like it was just awesome. And those videos, I was actually keeping a training log on YouTube at the time from Afghanistan. So it was pretty sweet. And that's where I think I started getting a lot of followership there. And what it came down to is just getting through these different phases of my training, realizing that like I can't just do 5x5, or not just me, but like you have to progress through different phases of training depending on what your training purpose is, right? So I remember reading like West Side for Skinny Bastards and being introduced to this idea of like general physical preparedness, you know, GPP work, and reading about this stuff online and realizing like, man, a majority of these guys, their training every year is just GPP. They're just going in, doing a lot of work, and then they're getting a ton of sport-specific training, ramping up to a powerlifting meet. And that's what really kind of changed my outlook on this sorts of stuff in the last few years, is focusing much more on building work capacity through variety, you know, whether it's repetitions or the kind of exercises that you're doing. And then when you're preparing for a competition, then that's when you want to get very, like, truly sports specific. Yeah, so long-winded answer there, but that's kind of the adventure of programming there.
No, that's very insightful. First of all, I want to say, as someone who just moved out of California around that, I lived in Redlands for a while. The fact that you were stationed in 29 Palms, I'm sorry. I know what that area is like.
Oh, dude, tough.
Yeah, and I bet there's some stories. But
Sure.
as far as the things you just mentioned, some of the principles and the sources you ran through there, I always find it interesting how no matter how diverse or kind of unique the source that you pull from is relative to like everything else out there, they always have some like key takeaway that kind of fills this gap with everything. Like practical programming, for instance, for as much as like the starting strength universe has kind of its own thing, and it's not really representative of like elite performance or how to get to the top, but it does have its little place. And you can even say, okay, well, newbies get better doing anything, so does it really have to be that? But reading through that, like the idea that this is why linear progression doesn't keep working, like why it works here, but why it doesn't work when you're more advanced, or stronger, more developed. Getting into like how you need to push workouts further apart, how recovery changes as you get stronger. Like that was one of those light bulb moments after like 10 years of doing this where it's like, oh, that's why elite guys like need 3 weeks to taper off as opposed to hitting their last single 4 days out, like, oh, it's one of those things that never gets touched on, never gets explicitly stated, but it's so vital to everything. And then going into like West Side, like you were talking about the value of GPP and maintaining like, oh shit, really? I shouldn't just lift as heavy as I can and then go home and eat a ham sandwich. Like there's maintenance that goes on. Like I need my capacity to be good. I can't just be like a fat shit like forklift and expect everything to be all right. But I see those principles as I look through the things that you've written out. It's like a very comprehensive way to kind of marry the best pieces of these programs together, where it's like you're getting closer to like a grand unified theory of training where you can fit as many of those vital principles as you can into one package. So I'm going to deviate a little bit from that because having read through some of your articles, you seem like a man with opinions, and I like that. So the first one I'm going to ask, are there trends, programs, coaches, things you recognize kind of out in the sphere, especially now that social media is ubiquitous and everybody's a click away from having somebody in their ear regarding fitness or strength advice? Is there anything that you don't like or that you outright hate, or any methodologies you've come across that you have issue with?
Oh, I wish I had like a list in front of me, man. My brain is, I got like a ping pong ball inside my head just going crazy right now. One thing that really started turning me off from social media, and I was posting much more frequently around 2014 to 2015, had a big life change, moved way up into the mountains where I've been since, and stopped posting as much on social media. And a big reason for this was that fitness social media took off into just like clickbait, basically. And, people with clickbait exercise, like video titles or thumbnails, and, do this, do not, like, top 5 reasons why the bench press is going to blow your shoulders up and you'll die or something, right? So, I mean, like, I'll just throw some dudes under the bus.
You won't be the first, so
yeah,
just go nuts.
Of course, these are of course like the biggest targets on YouTube or social media. It's like Athlete X.
Yeah,
the guy he wavers between, like saying one good thing and then the next 10 minutes are all just like, dude, you could have just stopped 10 minutes ago and it would have been great.
You're that close to a good take.
Yeah. And then there's that guy, I think his name is like Joel Seedman or something. Like everything's hyper functional, super optimal, like there's just, and then there's like a crowd of guys that are like truly solid dudes. And I think they just maybe take scientific based training to an extreme that is not warranted. And not that I'm anti-science on training or anything. It's like certainly the governing principles between the biology of how one improves, right? But I think that one's psychology has just as important, if not perhaps a more important aspect on how they approach training is what's your mental game like? So Like, I think it's Eric Bugenhagen says, like, screams mindset all the time or something. I kind of love that. You know, he's wild, he's over the top. But it is, you know, the psychology, can't talk, about how one approaches training matters a whole lot. And some of the more recent stuff that I put up on my blog, it's kind of tackled this. There's a lot of guys that, in my 1,000 Days post, I target disciplinarians. You know, these people say, like, oh, you don't have the right discipline, you know, to achieve the goals that you want. And they just kind of sell discipline as this idea of enlightenment, so to speak. They just try to conflate it with all these ideas of, like, this is how you achieve everything, is discipline, and discipline is it. And it's everything. It's like a new religion. So
those are like the Jocko Willink, like Steve Goggins types. Like, that's who you're thinking of?
You know, and I think that those guys both have a more nuanced and better, they've got a better take on it. My problem is that the guys who are copycats from Jocko and from David Goggins, you know, because Jocko and David Goggins, they could talk about discipline because they know what it means, and they know that it's not the end all be all. And I've picked that up. I don't listen to them religiously, but when I have listened to some things that they've been on, like podcasts or YouTube videos, or somebody sends me an article or something, I'm like, okay, like, this clicks. The problem is, like, phonies, right? These imitators that they watch Jocko, they watch David Goggins or whoever else, and they just try to emulate that. But, you know, they're worse. They're worse. Yeah. They simplify it down to, oh, well, it's just discipline, right? If you don't wake up at 3:30 in the morning and take a cold shower and then go on a 20-mile run, and they just make things superficially hard, right? It's like and I think I talked about this in that blog, is that they are selecting the things that they want others to perceive as hard, but it's like they're biasing it towards their proclivities. So it's not, like, truly hard. It'd be a different thing if I just, like, kicked in your door at 3 a.m, held you at gunpoint, like, we're going on a 25-mile ruck, grab this pack, and if you stop, like, I'm killing you. You know, like, that's totally extreme. But these people are like, oh, I'm going to wake up at 3 a.m, and I'm going to post it on social media. I'm going to get all these likes. I'm going to take this cold shower. And there's just so much fakeness to it that, like, really rubs me the wrong way, because I see so much people get burned out on thinking that they just don't have the discipline, or sticking to a program or something, like, oh, I bought this guy's program and it was just so hard I couldn't do it, and I just felt like crap, like I felt like a quitter and all this stuff. And it's like, look, man, just, like, it wasn't for you. Yeah. Like, move on. Find a program that, like, you enjoy doing. Have fun in the gym, because then you're going to develop a likeness for the gym, right? You're going to be in there all the time, and guess what? That's discipline. It's not that it has to be painful or shitty to mean discipline. It just is a different approach to consistency. And I think that's where a lot of these imitators go wrong, is they're talking about consistency. They're talking about all these other things. They just don't have the vocabulary. So they just boil it down to discipline.
Yeah, the subtle pieces of it, like you said, are important, because I was trying to think of big names that fit kind of that lean that you were talking about. But you're right. I've listened to a couple of, I've only seen Goggins on an interview or two, but I've listened to a little bit of Jocko, and there is, you're right, a nuance, and it's more of a useful approach, as opposed to, let me beat you over the head with this stylistic kind of performative ideology that I'm trying to make a buck off of. And and that's normally what phonies do, is they don't have the capacity to take it to that depth, so they just reproduce the simple, obvious pieces, and you end up losing a ton of resolution. And
great analogy.
I myself, I mean, honestly, and I'll hear people go off on against, like, the self-help people, because some of them get kind of cringy or toxic and over the top. And I myself have actually benefited from a lot of that, because it solved a problem for me. I lost a lot of structure as a teenager, and I can see how it replaces that. And it gave me, and it won't for everybody. You know, if this isn't a problem you have, yeah, it just sounds like noise, somebody chirping in your ear. And it was interesting, you said, working into their proclivities. Like, you already get up at 3 a.m. Like, that's a habit you learn to do, right? So if it's already a habit, it's not really that stressful. And that's kind of the point, that every bit of greatness that people are engaging in or trying to work towards, it's a byproduct of so many habits, not motivation, not negative self-talk about what a piece of shit you are, but just I've worked up to this steady, like, brushing my teeth. Like, you tell somebody who's never brushed their teeth a day in their life, like, what oral hygiene is, or like, I got to do what? Like, after every meal? Like, I'm not going to do that. But it's something you do every day and you don't think about it because it's been conditioned. And building habits is a skill, just like anything else. And like any skill, there's going to be ups and downs, and it takes a while to get it right. And it really is unfortunate because it's not just these guys branding themselves in a way that isn't useful. It's actually counterproductive, and it pushes people away from what they should be doing, and which is a more empowering message, which is you actually can do this. You can expect to fail a little bit, but slowly but steadily, you too can squat 135 for 99 reps, or some crazy goal like that seems so unattainable. And yeah, that's God, you mentioned the names you mentioned. It's like we're writing the same blog. Joel Seedman's probably the only hit piece I think I've ever done. I think I did one video. I have like 300 videos up. One of them was critical of Westside. And that by itself stirred up a lot of shit. And then Joel Seedman, I think, is the only other direct hit piece I've ever done where I'm like, okay, this guy needs to like take a long walk off a short cliff. Like this is where like it's not just you're misrepresenting yourself, but there's like harm being done to a pretty measurable degree as far as taking something that should be accessible and conflating it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, my biggest thing that I see him doing is that he's trying to apply sport-specific training, like the principles of sport-specific training, to things that are general exercises that go towards like improving not the athleticism of the event, but the physicality of the athlete, right? Mm-hmm. So this is where I see a lot of these people trying to work in the middle of being either a strength coach or a performance coach. Like, oh, well, I could be both actually. And no, you can't. You're not a football coach. You're not a baseball coach, and you're teaching this dude how to do some wild dumbbell exercise with a band standing on one foot is not actually improving his physicality. If anything, it's ruining the sport-specific training that he's actually worked on for years.
Well, the fact that he has the gall to call that sport-specific training shows that he's clueless. Because sport-specific training is reproducing game day events or funneling all of your broad general physical abilities towards this kind of razor thin edge where it applies to those game day scenarios. You don't do that by doing, like you said, standing on one leg like a chicken, curling while pressing with the band, and somebody's jostling you from the side because you need chaos in your life. Like, that's in no way, shape, or form specific to anything other than that one activity. So if you're looking at, I don't know what, balance, coordination, like if you're going on American Ninja Warrior, maybe. But even there's going to be a more structured, like purposeful way of building those qualities. And the best explanation I heard is like, and this is a thing with, the functional movement patterns. I don't know who that clown is. Naughty, is that his name? You get a lot of guys that go over the top with this shit. God, and then they do it under the guise of science because it looks sciencey, but it's not.
Yeah.
But the fact is,
science. I mean, it's what it is.
Completely, and it's a misunderstanding of the science that exists. When you're playing a sport, especially a field sport, you're on hard ground. You need to produce high amounts of force in very short periods of time. You need to be able to change direction quickly. You need to be able to jump high and run fast. It's you against a stable surface, which requires a ton of force development. You cannot do that when you're unstable. Like, your body won't let you do that. When you're on a tree branch and it's about to break, I'm stealing this, I think, from Mike Israel made this analogy. It's like, if you go to take a step on a tree branch, if you're out in the jungle or whatever, and it breaks, immediately your body seizes up. It's like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like, you step too hard, something's going to go. It's a built-in mechanism. Anyways, it doesn't have, so it's frustrating. I've taken issue with the evidence-based group because there's a lot of people that like to lean on their PhDs or their doctorates or in whatever. And again, like you had to make that disclaimer, right? Well, I'm not anti-science, because that's what people will say. And there's this huge mistake people make when they look at like somebody in a research setting with a clipboard and actual science as like the pursuit of truth and getting as close as you can. Like they're the same thing. And I take big issue when people try to overrepresent what you can pull out of a study, when you try to overrepresent, you know, the data, how good it is, if it could be better, if there were sources of error. And we're at a point, like in exercise science, there's so many questions you can't even ask if you're trying to put together a study. Like you can't ask, you know, I saw Jeff Nippard's podcast. He just had somebody on, James Krieger, I think. He's one of these guys who he hasn't done anything, and he doesn't coach anybody really who's done anything, but he's a big academic guy, and that's his bread and butter. And he acknowledged, he's like, if I'm testing medium volume versus anything else, well, if the people in that group, some might have done low volume, some might have done high volume, some have done, it's different. So we're adaptive organisms. So even along the journey, everything changes. Anyways, I could fill up the rest of the hour just ranting about these people. But I firmly believe everybody, some people come out and be like, oh, well, it's a good place to start. And it's like, even then it's not. In no scenario would somebody be better off going on PubMed or talking to somebody like that than just getting Arnold's Bodybuilding Encyclopedia and doing some really hard shit. It's like the best starting point is your baseline, what you're capable of doing, and making decisions based on your needs and problem solving as they come up.
Yeah, and for me, it's like I look back to how I got into lifting weights. It was really just observing what the strongest dudes in the gym were doing and trying my best to keep up. And I didn't die. I didn't overtrain. And you know what? I had gone from never deadlifting before to I started lifting weights kind of like early in my Iraq deployment, maybe like month 2 out of a 9-month pump. And the month I was about to leave, not only had I lost weight because I was kind of like a skinny, fat, you know, heavy drinking Marine that would, you know, live off of Taco Bell. And I could run good. I could do pull-ups. I was an outstanding swimmer. I could do all that like Marine Corps PT super good. But like anybody who's ever been in the infantry will tell you, like, there are dudes that could show up like literally throwing up from the night before. They're so drunk. And then they can run like an 18-minute 3-mile.
Jesus.
You know, these guys, there are some people that are just absolute freaks. And I wasn't on quite that level, but I wasn't really in shape. I could just keep up and like do well enough. And when I got into lifting weights, it was maybe a 7-month span of learning how to deadlift to losing maybe 15, 20 pounds, getting to 142 pounds and deadlifting 405. No belt, just a shitty bar, like probably sweaty hands, a million degrees in Iraq, and pulling 405. And I didn't get there like doing starting strength or any of these like science-based programs or anything. It was literally just trying to keep up with those strong guys in the gym were doing. You know, like, damn, that guy's strong. Like, okay, he's deadlifting on Wednesdays. I'm deadlifting on Wednesdays. Like, so, you know, it wasn't anything special.
You're saying that you did not, in fact, use calibrated plates to get your 405 deadlift at 142.
Oh, dude, anything but. I think that the plate set that we had there was manufactured in, I don't know, 12 different countries at different thicknesses, and who knows exactly how much it actually was.
That's better for you. I mean, experiencing different things, not always having, especially when you're new, not always having ideal circumstances, like as if you have to walk a razor thin tightrope of consistency in your exercise protocol to grow when you're new. And it's one thing. I mean, the funny thing is, I don't even know anybody that's really, really good that has that mentality. It usually is the hobbyists or the new people coming in that have their favorite deadlift bar, or that don't know what to do if they don't have chalk, or if they leave their belt at home, they're done. They have to go home.
Don't even get me started. Don't even get me started. This is like what really got me like hating so much of this like social media powerlifting, social media fitness. It's like all these special gear, special bars, special this. And dude, I have like 5 specialty bars in my gym. But you know, if I just had one, I would still lift weights.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when I moved from I lived in a log cabin, like when I first moved up into the mountains. We didn't even have like a bathroom door, man. Just like a curtain. And I had like a garage gym or whatever, packed all that up. We moved into like the house I'm currently in now, which you could tell looks like a real house. I had all my gym gear packed up, but all I did left unpacked was like the old school 1-inch barbell set that had like weight plates that like one was 37 pounds, one was 23 pounds, one was like 53 pounds. And it was like you just 1-inch barbell. And I didn't have the space to unpack all my gym stuff. I had a barn that I was getting built and ordered and delivered or whatever. And that's where I'm training out of right now. But I was still in my backyard just throwing around this like old school, just 1-inch barbell set that I actually chopped down from a 6-foot bar down to like a little 3-footer. So it was like a midget bar. And then the other one I would like swing around like a mace or just do silly shit. And I did that for like a summer and did hikes in my backyard and carried weights with me or picked up rocks in the forest and whatever. And then I got my barn that I'm in now, and it's freaking amazing.
That's great.
But there's so many people like, you know, like, oh, I've left my SBD knee sleeves at home. Like, I'm just going home. I can't train today.
And I mean, what got my mindset shifted, I mean, on the one hand, there's how I started training, which was for football and the outdoor gym under the bleachers where everything was rusted to shit. So I have an affinity to like dark brown rusted bars just because like the smell, it reminds me of being 15 and fat and getting my ass kicked in the weight room with all the varsity guys. Where transitioning into strongman, it's like for the last 15 years, there has been zero certainty as to what equipment I would be using in a meet. It could be, it's like, oh, it's an axle. It could be stainless steel. It could have a paint coating on it. It could be a piece of galvanized pipe from Home Depot. You never know, right? And then there's infinitely different numbers of equipment that are welded by different people or made by different manufacturers. The friction's never the same. The diameter's never the same. So you're not best off assuming that your performance should always be based off of this very tightly controlled equipment. And it's hard to watch with as popular as powerlifting has gotten because they moved up together kind of in lockstep. I think CrossFit drove a lot of people to strength sports. So I think powerlifting made a resurgence and strongman got bigger on the back end. But watching a sport that has so much less variability, where people are so fixated on an exact replication of circumstances for their training, their performance, I mean, it can only be a net negative. And then there's this Ed Cohen story about how he went to, it was, I don't know, some worlds or nationals he went to, and these guys in his weight class were throwing a fit because it wasn't like an actual deadlift bar. You know, it's like, oh, we thought we were going to get the super whippy Texas whatever, and they just had a stiff power bar. And then Cohen went and he like pulled a world record on it, and he shrugged his shoulders. He's like, it's like, I don't know, if you're strong, you're going to lift it. And I think that the mentality is very much important. So given that, and then we've talked a bit about social media and some of the people in the industry and how they kind of get clients for themselves by preying on people's ignorance or vulnerabilities or whatever. As far as like generic lifting culture, people that are our audience who might be likely to buy our stuff or get coaching, you know, the people who usually train solo or they're newer or they're hobbyists, what impression do you have of lifting culture right now? How do you think it's changed? And what things do you think people really miss? Like the big thing that you think holds a lot of people back? Like what are some of the trends there?
Oh, man. I guess it's like what my shirt says right here. Try trying.
I was going to comment on that. Where can people buy that, by the way?
I've got a merch shop. It's on Teespring. So that'll be like in my Instagram profile, or like at the end of, I think, my minimal is not optimal blog post. I think it's my most recent one. I think it's hyperlinked there. But if you just search in Teespring Gains Shop, that's what it is.
All right.
GAINZ. But yeah, try trying, man. There's a lot of people that they come to me for training because they're like, hey, I see you train at home by yourself, like in your own like gym, and you've been doing this for a while, like, and you're doing good. Can you help me with that? Because you know, for a long time, like I was really a socially driven lifter. I would go to like these gyms and like just have amazing training sessions because, you know, I went to Bart Kwan's Barbell Brigade right after Thanksgiving. So I was like fat and happy on holiday food and at Barbell Brigade. And like, you can't get almost any better for hitting, you know, beltless deadlift PRs and, you know, long pause squats that turn heads in the gym. Right. So I went from that to like, man, I live above 10,000 feet, trained by myself. Some days I'm shoveling snow for 6 hours just to clear my driveway, and then a path to the gym. And I get in the gym and I smash out like hundreds of squats. What makes me like want to do that? I don't really know. But it's, you know, I see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and then I see that people see me doing this stuff and they come to me because they want to learn. I think they recognize that they've gotten to this point in their training where it's like, it's become stale, right? And they don't know exactly how to change things up in a productive way. You know, they think that it might be just like messing around and they like backslide. So I like to permit a little bit of messing around, right? Just like say, hey, let's, you know, it's fine that you went off program today. You hit a new 10 rep max because the bench was feeling good. I'd rather you do that and have fun in the gym than to email me and say like, hey, you know, things weren't going that good. So I just, you know, left the gym, went home, watched Netflix. It's like, no, dude, if I had a nickel for every time I just essentially gave permission to a person to have fun in the gym, dude, I'd probably have a lot of nickels. Because it does seem like there's a lot of times where people just like get stuck on like a program, and I kind of kick myself because I feel like I perpetuated that by coming out with these different training programs where people are like, oh, well, I have to do like GZCL or Jacked and Tan or any of these, you know, number of lifting programs that are derived from my GZCL method, which, you know, is like that pyramid structure and whatever.
That's a hard, there's a kind of a paradox there. And I think everybody runs into it because that's a hard thing to reconcile. Because on the one hand, in some sense, you would think that like, if you want to be a world champ, the quickest way there is to immediately, as fast as you can, find a method of training or some distribution of stress that's sustainable that you can learn and you can get over the learning curve, figure out how you respond to it, and then just milk it, wash, rinse, repeat forever, right? Because the people that are at IPF Worlds or World Strongest Man, they don't like do different shit every 6 months in general. You know, there's kind of an even ebb and flow that's pretty consistent. But on the other hand, you do need to experiment. You do need to figure out what you respond to better or worse, what splits, which frequencies, which exercises that get stacked together might be fine for somebody, might devastate you and fill you with swelling and inflammation. And psychology, you were talking about psychology, that's so important too. If people don't enjoy this, I mean, most people, I know myself included, are not cut out to just be robots that like, I'm going to do this monotonous thing day in, day out until it kills me because I want to be a world champion so bad. So I think that is such an important thing that you have to, and that's where my mind's been going because I've been thinking like, what should I write next? And you're right. It's like in perpetuating these programs, it's like I'm telling people, oh, do this split. And then if it works for you, don't change it and keep doing it over and over until it gets stale. That's highly unenjoyable. And when I look at people that do physique or bodybuilding, people that have free reign to do whatever they feel like in the gym that day, as long as they meet like this minimum requirement of work, it's almost like, well, why can't that also be a staple in training? And it feels like it should. And then I think of guys like Wendler, who he starts 531 by saying like, if you fuck with this program, you're not doing my program. And then he writes 3 books filled with ways to fuck with the program, where it's all variations, because you need that. You need to be able to add variations when it's merited, but at the same time, you have to dial it in, and reconciling those two things. It's not easy. It's not easy to do, and I don't think there is a right answer.
Right, and I think that leads to, it's a kind of a good segue to how I've been training for the last 3+ years. I've gotten away from percentage-based training, away from having an Excel spreadsheet in front of my face, and I'm like checking these boxes. You know, I did this set and this set and this set, and everything's going good. And then suddenly there's one workout that's disastrous, and I'm at my lowest low, and I'm a total piece of shit. And, you know, I don't even deserve to live anymore because I missed that rep.
You just take your ball and go home.
Yeah, you know, I'm so thankful I moved on from that. And I see a lot of people that get into powerlifting. They really love the sport. They like competing it as hobbyists. But it's not what sustains their drive to be in the gym. You know, they want to have something else different. These are people that know they're not going to IPL Worlds or IPF Worlds, whatever the heck. I've trained people that have gone to that level for sure. Sylvia Lovenrack, for example, in 2017, she was best female lifter at IPL Worlds. I sent another female lifter, Canadian, on the IPF national team for Canada to Sweden, I think, in 2019. She was a junior, I think got placed 6th overall or something. But anyways, these are different people with different goals. They need to have different training, right? And so where I see a lot of people, most of the people who get into lifting weights, they might have early dreams of going to IPF Worlds or something, but perhaps that becomes a reality that they no longer want. They're like, okay, I need to focus on my career and like make money and pay for this house that I want to live in with my family. Like, I still want to lift weights, but how do I make it enjoyable if I don't have this grand goal of becoming an IPF champion, right? And so that's where it comes into this, like you said, monotony, right? There's, I've written about this before, where there's this relationship between consistency and monotony, right? And if your training is becoming monotonous, it's good in a sense because you've been consistent, right? So how can we keep that erosion, that sinking feeling of monotony where you're just like become drowning in your own training, right? You've been treading water for months and months doing the same thing, and it's like you're just ready to drown, like you've accepted your fate. How do we prevent that? It's through variation in your training. And it could just be like 1 degree of variation, right? That might be what saves a person and keeps them in the gym and being consistent, and maybe introduces more vigor into their training, right? They're now going after it harder because they have this new thing to tackle. It doesn't necessarily mean they have to change, all of these different factors to have more variety and variation in their training. It could be going from, like a low bar squat to a high bar squat or something like that. Maybe they've never focused on front squats. Maybe they do front squats or safety squat bar. I see the more powerlifting centric group, and maybe this isn't so much in strongman, like in your circle. I have more people coming to me. They're like, hey, I do compete in powerlifting sometimes. And I've just been doing powerlifting programs for 2 years and I hate my life. It's like, okay, well, have you ever done a front squat before? Like, they're pretty tough and, they'll get your squat stronger. And like, no, I've never done a front squat. Okay, well, guess what? We're doing a ton of front squats. They're going to be miserable, but your squat is going to get stronger, right? And you just introduce these like small factors of variation. GPP work is one thing that has really saved my training a lot. And I coached at a CrossFit gym as like their strength coach or whatever. I did coach some CrossFit classes. Did this for like 2 years and some change. And one thing I really learned a lot from CrossFit was just how much fun you could have in the gym. And it was like getting permission to just have fun lifting weights, right? I feel like there's a lot of powerlifters, maybe strongman, I don't know, that like think that it's got to be something miserable and like you got to grind through your training. And if you're smiling while you're lifting weights, like you're not trying hard enough. It's like, nah, man. Like, have you ever seen Tom Platt squat 500 for 23? I think he's smiling the whole time. Maybe that's just his personality, but that's where I see a lot of people get into that monotonous training, and they need to just have some variation, some variety. It could be doing more reps, it could be just doing conditioning workouts, something.
Yeah, and it works out nicely that variety is necessary on some level to keep growing, because you don't just grow from the same stress. Yeah. And it reminds me of a podcast episode I'd heard. It was a Barbell Logic, which is starting strength, practical programming, universe type guys. And they love their starting with linear progression and then they go on about minimum effective dose, which in some practice I like and I'm a fan of. It's like, don't screw with everything at once, find the minimum effective dose. But when you're starting with a linear progression, and that's what you do for all of your clients, it's like everybody better love 5s for now until you hate it, because that's when it's stale, when you can't squeeze it out anymore. And one of the guys was even saying, he's like, I had this client, he's progressed amazingly for a couple of years, but he's middle-aged. And there was one workout where he just stopped. He's like, you got to tell me why I'm still doing this. It's like, why I'm still doing 5s, why I'm still, and not to knock the program or the effects or the results, but his psychology was at the point where I've been doing 5s in the same basic lifts for months on end, living and dying for those 5-pound increments, when in reality, And there's a lot of value because obviously that works. It's idiot proof.
Yeah.
It has so many positives, which when you're just trying to cast a wide net and throw at a bunch of people like, hey, here you go, try this, with minimal people dropping off or not being successful, it's great. But once you do have a bird's eye view where you can kind of look in and tweak some things, you can be like, oh, we can vary a ton week to week. Like what 531 does, what you do. I mean, any program that does waves, which a lot of them do, Juggernaut takes big swings and then drops back. A lot of them do that. It's like, oh, you get variation week to week. Oh, it's still a relevant stress to what we're trying to do. Oh, it's still on this timeline where we can keep track of progress. But oh my God, I don't want to blow my brains out because I'm just hitting the same note every day. Exercise selection's huge. It's one of the main reasons I hear that people go towards Westside. Any complaint I've had is that it's probably too complex for its audience, for most of the people that are likely to do it, which are novices and early intermediates. You know, if you're a world champ, you're not going to switch to Westside out of nowhere, right? So it's people lower down that have a harder time with exercise selection. But the variety, and I hear this all the time, it makes it exciting. What are we doing today? Oh, we're trying a new variation and I get to go as heavy as I can. It's like, holy hell, that's no wonder guys are like so excited to do this thing, regardless of what the potential pitfalls are. But that's such an important aspect of it that gets left behind.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the biggest merits of Westside. And like you said earlier, there's valid complaints about Westside, right? And then, of course, you stir the pot just a tiny bit, you throw a pebble in that pond, and all of the Westside fanatics go crazy like piranhas, right? They're just going to just chew the meat off the bone. You dip your foot in there with a little bit of criticism. But here it goes. I think it can get too extreme on variation, right?
Yeah.
And that's my biggest complaint, you know, because it's like you said, with novices and intermediates, they just don't develop the skill. And where they do get it right is that over time you repeat these safety squat bar good mornings, and over time they learn what these movement patterns are. And that's what they do like so good, because when you're doing 5x5 on a low bar squat and it starts stacking up heavier and heavier and heavier, and this person's starting to do like a good morning squat, and they're like, man, I used to squat like this, but now I squat like this. And now I fail like this, and I'm failing more reps more often. It's like, well, because you haven't learned how to do a heavy good morning. You haven't learned how to fight for position. And that's where Westside just does things beautifully. And I think that's where variation, variety, and training is key. I wrote a program, I don't know, maybe 2015, 16, 17, I forget, whatever, deadlift waveforms and then bench press waveforms, where essentially, like, if we have like three different movements, right? One is like your higher volume movement at the beginning, and one's your higher intensity, lower volume movement, right? But these things basically, over the course of, let's say, 6 weeks, whatever, they switch places, right? Where I'm taking like maybe a 4-inch block pull and adding weight until that becomes my main lift, my T1 is the vernacular I use. And then taking that standard deadlift and changing it perhaps to like a RDL and then like a stiff leg deficit deadlift on the back end or something. And so that way these people can see that there's this scale of specificity in their movement and in their training volume and intensity. And it gives them enough of these factors that it keeps them engaged, right? And I've seen tons of people just get very strong off of doing these like waveform progressions, where they're, you know, maybe using a slingshot bench and then a block, and then perhaps, you know, just the last 3 weeks, something is just like a true competition pause bench. Right.
Yeah. It seems like that's one of the big questions any program can answer. Like, given the people that you're looking after and how close you are to them, are these people I work with in person, or are they on the other side of the world and they're just buying a PDF from me? If you can kind of evenly and intelligently find ways of recommending that variety, because at this point it seems like basic assumption, you need variety in some matter. You need to learn different movement patterns. You need to incorporate areas that you're weak at or that you're uncomfortable in, exploit some areas you're strong in, but more movement patterns over time in some capacity is going to be better. It's just, how do you arrange it? How do you prescribe it? Especially given individuality. especially given the client filter, because every client has their filter they put the information through that comes out on the other end as something else. So it's like, hey, hit that top 3 at RPE 7, and they're like, okay, well, I missed a single. Like that's always what you have to adapt for. And with exercise selection and dealing with all that, that's very very tricky to do. I'm interested to take a look at that waveform thing. That sounds interesting. I've always been a fan of more linear stuff because of that, where linear periodization. So the high volume bracket, whether it's accumulation, volume, hypertrophy, whatever you call that phase, is always just super varied. Like that's where you get it out of the way. That's where you're going to grow, and you're going to get really comfortable with shit you're not used to, and nothing has to be that specific. And it kind of mirrors general athletic training in that way. And it's one of the reasons I've kind of changed my mind a little bit with regards to starting strength and really simple LPs. At least ones that don't have a lot of variability or play in the joints in them. Because if you're looking at anybody who's novice in any sport, anywhere in any field, the rule is with youth athletics, with new athletes, you always prioritize variation. You give them driver's ed for their body. So you want your kid to be Tiger Woods. When he's 4, you don't give him a golf club and say, this is all you're doing now. You have them play baseball. You have them play soccer. You have them run. You have them learn how to use their body, and it avoids burnout and it builds positive association. And it's the key to getting a well-rounded enough base that you actually have something to build that lofty goal on top of in the first place.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring that up. I remember reading some years ago about how parents nowadays are, making their children just hyper-specific athletes, right? So they're playing baseball year-round. They're going to training camps in the spring, playing baseball through the summer. In the winter, they're with a specialized coach, pitching indoors. And then these are high school players getting injuries that pros used to only get.
Yep.
And so part of that is because they're just only playing baseball. This kid is not meant to be a first baseman for, half of his life. He's 12. By the time he's 24, he can't even throw anymore.
Yeah.
He's burned out in college ball and just can't even make it into the minors or something.
And he probably hates his parents anyways for making him do that shit his entire life.
Exactly.
So he's like, I'm going to throw this game. Fuck you, Dad.
It would have been so much better if he had just, been a first baseman this part of the year, maybe a point guard this part of the year, and then who knows, some guy just on the bench practicing football another part of the year. Who knows? The same idea applies to lifting weights and just general physical training. I've got, I live in a really small town. We've got 2010 census, 279 people living here. And a lot of old timers, people are coming up here, they're either retirement age or they're just lived here forever. 2 of my clients are in their 60s. They never lifted weights in their life. They started lifting weights with me when they were 59 and then 63. And they're coming to my gym lifting with me, and I'm keeping them on variety, keeps them engaged, and they're getting stronger. So for example, this woman I'm training, she just turned 60 this year. She started with a 1-arm dumbbell overhead press with 5-10 pounds or something. We just progressed that to volume. When you started with me, you could do 10 pounds for 10 reps. Now you can do 10 pounds for 20 reps. We're going to add some weight. So we just progressed that volume. And this is another program, and this is where my training has started to go towards. And this was back in 2017, I think, volume dependent intensity progression, VDIP. So basically you hit a volume landmark, then you add weight, right? It's a lot of how I'm training people nowadays, how I'm training myself, how my current training framework is based around. But if, this woman's doing a 1-arm dumbbell overhead press, and she can get 10 pounds up to 20 reps, and then 15 pounds up to 10 reps, and then maybe, 12 reps or something like that, whatever. Now she's been with me for months, and she's going from a 10-pound overhead dumbbell press to a barbell press of 48 pounds for 12 reps or something. I forget what it was. And she's 60 and never lifted weights in her life. She's a skier. She does, and a real estate agent, and so I try to explain to people, we don't have to make things hyper specific or super complicated. It's not either one, there's no, it's, the people are trapped in these 2 ideas basically, right? It has to be one or the other. And that's why I really like having variety, in training, whether it's your movements, but also the forms of progression. It's not just adding weight every single week. I've got clients right now that they're lifting the same weight for 4 weeks in a row, just trying to add reps. And they're taking what they can do for an easy 6 rep max. Maybe they're leaving 2 or 3 reps in the tank on week 1. And by the time it's week 4, they're doing it for like literally 14 repetitions. And they're like, dude, in week 1, I thought I could only bench this for like 8, so I stopped at 6. And now I can do it for 14. Like, this doesn't make sense to me. Like, of course it makes sense, dude. We're adding a set this week. We're adding another set this week. We're adding another repetition. It's like Hepburn. This is where I kind of stole this idea from, is just adding a rep, right? Just do a little bit more.
It's insanely underused strategy because it's not sexy, I think. I think that's why. It's not as fun. It's not as fun to hang around and do more work. And I use a similar method, except I'm an asshole. I use it aggressively, and I do it with like 10s and 12s. So it's like, you start with like 2 sets of 12, and then you're up to like 5 sets of 10, and with squats and with a lot of compound movements. But I have to warn people. It's like, your first workout, I make it so it's going to be 45 minutes. Your third workout is probably going to be an hour and a half. You're just sticking you can always hang out a little bit longer. If you're having to guess, can I do the same thing with a little more weight? Depends on how far back you started. But no matter what, you can always do another set. Volume's one of the easiest things to manipulate. But yeah, it requires a willingness to be bored, I think, to hang out a little bit longer. Yeah. But it's devastatingly effective.
Yeah, so the way I try to like frame it to my clients and people that come to me with questions, maybe they're training scales. And a lot of the times the training scale, because they've only looked at intensity as the form of progression, right? But we have intensity, we have volume, we have density, how much work you can do in a specific unit of time. So maybe I'm like, hey, start limiting your rest. We're going to do the same workouts, but I want you to cut the rest in half, or maybe like a third or something. We'll see. And then we have ability and those different lift qualities and stuff, right? So there's all these different factors of progression, and people are just so blinded onto intensity because it is the sexiest one, adding weight to the bar.
Yeah, until it stops working, and then it's like an ex-girlfriend.
Yeah.
So you have a bit of a powerlifting history. You've competed. Do you have anything coming up that you're getting ready for?
Oh, I've been thinking about doing a meet maybe late this year in the winter. We'll see. I have not competed since 2016. My last meet was the Colorado State Championships. I won best lifter there. They put up like a 15-26 total at 175. I'd like to beat that if I could this year, but now I'm much bigger now. I'd probably be competing as a solid 181. Maybe have to cut down to that. I'm walking around like 190-ish, 195 right now, depending on the day, and just slowly getting leaner. I bulked up a lot in the last 2 years. Doing bodybuilding. What do you know? Like, you build your body, you get bigger, strange, and then you get stronger too, right?
Shocking.
Build that capacity. It's revolutionary.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe a powerlifting meet later this year. We'll see. I've got a lot coming up in the next 2 months, but it might be exactly what is going to foster a strong performance at a meet late in the year.
Excellent. And go ahead and let people know where they can get in touch with you or where they can find your content. What's the best avenue to get in touch with everything that Cody's putting out these days?
All right. So through Instagram, you can send me a DM, you subscribe, or whatever, follow that. Like, share, subscribe. Instagram. It's the Fever is my Instagram handle. It's just my nickname, The Fever. And so you can follow me there. I've got links. I'll be always just posting, whether it's a YouTube video. That's GZCL on YouTube. You just search GZCL. You'll find me on YouTube.
I'll have it on links too.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And then my blog, Swole at Every Height. That's been around for a decade now, I think. And it's not like I'm cranking out blog posts every week or every month even. And some of these blog posts are incredibly long, 20, 30 pages. Just free content, and maybe it's not what's for you, but there's a lot of free stuff there at Swole at Every Height, and so that's where you'd be most likely to find me. On Reddit. My handle on Reddit is GZCL. That's where all this took off from. So there's a RGZCL subreddit. I'm active in the weight room, and I'd probably be more active. I try to limit my social media time. There's other things to do out there. But yeah, thanks for the opportunity to come on your podcast, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely, man. It was a pleasure having you on. I think people are going to get a lot out of this talk. So thank you, Cody, for joining us today. We'll see. People keep saying you need to have guests on because I start rambling when I'm in a dark room by myself with a microphone, and it's not good for anybody. Yeah. It's like those 20, 30-page posts you talk about, but it's me talking and it's stream of consciousness. So I'm planning on having more guests, doing more interviews, but I'll definitely have you on again. This was fantastic. Yeah, so thanks for coming on. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Until next time, I'll see you.